The deafening screech of tires against asphalt shattered the tranquil suburban morning, sending a flock of startled birds into the sky. A woman in a blindingly bright pink power suit stormed across a perfectly manicured lawn, her designer heels stabbing into the soft grass like tiny daggers. In one hand she clutched a clipboard as though it were a weapon, in the other a steaming cup of black coffee that sloshed dangerously close to the rim. Her face, twisted in sheer outrage, was locked onto the horror before her, a monstrosity that, in her mind, threatened to unravel the very fabric of the neighborhood's perfection. A massive red fire truck loomed in the middle of a pristine driveway, its polished chrome reflecting the morning sun like a battle flag daring her to act. To most, it was nothing more than the vehicle of a hero, but to Karen, the self-proclaimed queen of the HOA, it was a blatant act of rebellion, a grotesque violation of the sacred code of neighborhood aesthetics. She marched forward with the force of an avenging angel and pounded on the door, each knock more furious than the last. Inside, Jake Miller, an exhausted firefighter fresh off a grueling 48-hour shift, groaned as he pried his face off the couch cushion. His golden retriever, Sparky, wagged his tail sleepily, utterly uninterested in the chaos brewing outside. Jake blinked at the clock. 7:02 a.m. Who in their right mind was knocking like the house was on fire? Dragging himself to the door, he swung it open, still half asleep, only to be met with Karen's furious glare. She thrust the clipboard at him like a warrant for his immediate arrest. "You're in violation," she snapped, her voice laced with the kind of authority that only existed in her own head. Jake blinked. "What?" Karen pointed a perfectly manicured finger at his truck. "Commercial vehicles are strictly forbidden in driveways, and that," she jabbed the air, "is a commercial vehicle." Jake, still groggy, ran a hand down his face. "It's not commercial. It's mine. I'm a firefighter, emergency services, saving lives." Karen's lips pursed so tightly they could have turned coal into diamonds. "I don't care if you're rescuing kittens from burning trees. Rules apply to everyone. That's a $500 fine." Jake let out a sharp, disbelieving laugh. "You're joking." Karen didn't even blink. "Do I look like I'm joking?" At that exact moment, Sparky trotted up, snatched the fine from Jake's hand, and, with the precision of a seasoned troublemaker, shredded it between his teeth before spitting the remains onto Karen's pristine white sneakers. For the first time in her HOA reign, Karen was speechless. Her eye twitched as she looked down at the soggy paper bits clinging to her designer shoes. Then, gasping in horror, she shrieked, "Destruction of HOA property? That's another fine." Jake ran a hand through his hair, his patience wearing dangerously thin. His body ached from dragging people out of a burning apartment complex, and now, here he was, battling the local neighborhood dictator over where he parked the very truck that saved lives. "Karen," he exhaled, attempting reason, "this is ridiculous. I live here. That truck is the reason people are alive today." Karen's eyes narrowed. "Rules are rules. If I let you break them, next thing you know, someone's putting up neon signs and suddenly we have a theme park on our hands." Jake's patience snapped. "A theme park? Karen, I parked a truck in my own driveway. I'm not building a damn roller coaster in my front yard." The door of a nearby house creaked open. Mr. Thompson, a retired lawyer, stepped onto his porch, sipping his coffee with a knowing smirk. "Morning, Jake," he called out, eyes twinkling with amusement. "I see you've met the HOA's favorite menace." Karen spun on her heel, indignant. "I am simply enforcing community standards." Thompson chuckled. "Right, like when you fined Mrs. Peterson for having aggressively festive Christmas lights?" Karen's face burned red, but Jake could already tell this battle wasn't over. Karen's face burned with indignation, her perfectly manicured nails digging into the clipboard she still clutched like a shield. The audacity of it all, the fire trucks, the smirks from the neighbors, the fire chief treating her like an inconvenience instead of the upholder of order, was more than she could stomach. As the final fire truck rumbled down the street, leaving behind only the echo of sirens and the faint scent of exhaust, she realized something far worse than the public humiliation she had just endured. She had lost control. For years, Karen had reigned over this neighborhood with an iron fist, her enforcement of HOA rules meticulous and unwavering. And now, in one morning, she had become the punchline of a joke. The gathered neighbors still whispered, some openly chuckling, their amused glances like tiny daggers stabbing at her pride. Mr. Thompson, ever the insufferable observer, took a long sip of his coffee and smirked. "Well, that was quite the spectacle," he mused, as if she wasn't standing right there. Karen's lips pressed into a thin line. She wouldn't let this slide. No, this wasn't over, not by a long shot. With a sharp turn, she stormed back toward her house, her mind racing. The HOA board would have her back on this. Surely they would see reason. If they allowed this kind of blatant rule-breaking to go unchecked, what would stop the neighborhood from descending into chaos? Today it was a fire truck. Tomorrow it would be food trucks, neon signs, inflatable holiday decorations, and before they knew it, they'd be living in anarchy. She yanked open her front door and slammed it shut behind her, immediately pulling out her phone to dial the HOA board president, Mark Reynolds. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times before going to voicemail. Karen scowled and called again, straight to voicemail. She gritted her teeth. Was he ignoring her? That was unacceptable. A 3rd call. Finally, a groggy voice answered. Karen, it's barely 9 in the morning. What do you want? Mark's irritation was palpable, but Karen pushed forward. We have a major violation, Mark. A firefighter, Jake Miller, has completely disregarded HOA regulations, parked a commercial vehicle in his driveway, and openly defied authority. I need the board to back me up on this. There was a long silence, then a sigh. Karen, do you have any idea how bad this looks? Karen stiffened. Bad? What are you talking about? Mark's voice was sharper this time. We've been flooded with emails and phone calls all morning. The entire neighborhood is furious with you. You didn't crack down on an unkempt lawn, Karen. You tried to tow a firefighter's emergency vehicle. Do you realize how many people in this neighborhood have family members who are first responders? You picked the worst possible battle. Karen scoffed. The HOA exists to enforce rules, not win popularity contests. If we let this slide? Mark cut her off. The board already had an emergency meeting. Without you, we took a vote. Her heart rate spiked. A vote on what? On removing you as the HOA enforcer, effective immediately. The words struck like a slap. You can't do that, she snapped, her voice rising. We already did, Mark said flatly, and it was unanimous. Even the board members who usually agree with you are sick of this. You've turned the HOA into a joke, Karen. We're done cleaning up your messes. The call ended before she could say another word. Karen stood frozen, the phone still pressed against her ear though the line was dead. This had to be some kind of mistake. She had dedicated years to keeping this neighborhood in order, ensuring everything ran smoothly, and now they were turning on her? The next morning, Karen awoke to an unfamiliar sound. Laughter. Outside, neighbors were chatting, kids were riding bikes, and people seemed happy. No one was anxiously rushing to pull their trash cans in within her enforced 3-minute window. No one was pruning their bushes in fear of a citation, and then she saw it, a massive banner stretched across the neighborhood park entrance. Neighborhood Barbecue, celebrating the end of HOA tyranny. Free food, everyone welcome. Karen's hands clenched into fists. She stormed outside, prepared to rip the sign down, but then she spotted something worse. Jake, standing on his driveway, casually loading a cooler into his truck. His golden retriever Sparky sat beside him, wagging his tail. Jake looked up, caught her stare, and grinned. Morning, Karen. Hope to see you at the barbecue. Karen felt her blood pressure spike. You think this is funny? Jake shrugged. I think it's hilarious. She took a deep breath, trying to regain her composure. Enjoy your little celebration while you can. I'm going to fight this. The HOA needs structure, and Jake cut her off, shaking his head. The HOA doesn't need you, and guess what? No one wants you in charge anymore. It's over, Karen. Karen's jaw tightened, but deep down she knew he was right. As the day went on, the neighborhood came alive in a way it never had before. Music played, children ran around freely, and neighbors gathered, not in tense rule-enforced silence, but in genuine joy. The firefighters were the guests of honor, with people lining up to shake their hands and thank them for their service. Karen watched it all from her window, her expression unreadable. She had spent so much time enforcing rules, controlling every detail, that she had forgotten what a neighborhood was supposed to feel like. It wasn't about uniformity. It was about community. And for the first time, Karen realized the truth. The neighborhood had finally come together, not because of her. Karen stood firm, her shoulders squared, her expression a mask of defiance, as murmurs rippled through the crowd. The humiliation of being outmaneuvered in front of the entire neighborhood still burned hot in her veins, but she refused to let this be the end of her reign. Straightening her blazer with a crisp tug, she lifted her chin and addressed the onlookers with her signature air of self-importance. This is far from over, she declared, her voice ringing with righteous indignation. That man has blatantly disregarded HOA regulations, and I will not allow such disrespect to go unpunished. Mr. Thompson, ever the neighborhood's unofficial commentator, smirked over the rim of his coffee cup. So, what's next, Karen? Going to fine the entire fire department? Laughter rippled through the onlookers, their amusement a sharp jab to her pride. Karen's lips pressed into a thin, determined line. She refused to back down, especially not in front of these people. Without another word, she spun on her heel and marched back toward her house, her heels striking the pavement like gunfire. The second she stepped inside, she slammed the door shut and yanked out her phone, dialing the HOA board. Someone had to put that firefighter in his place, and if the neighborhood wouldn't support her, she would make sure the board did. Meanwhile, at the fire station, Jake barely had time to throw his truck into park before launching into action. The fire on Elm Street was already raging, a thick plume of black smoke curling into the sky, visible from miles away. In an instant, the absurdity of his morning with Karen faded, replaced by the laser focus of survival and duty. Within minutes, he was suited up, helmet strapped on, charging into the inferno alongside his crew. The heat was unbearable, the air thick with ash and burning debris, but Jake and his team worked like a well-oiled machine. They battled the flames, rescued 2 trapped residents, and prevented the fire from spreading to neighboring homes. It took over an hour before the last ember was extinguished, and by the time they were rolling up the hoses, exhaustion was beginning to take its toll. Jake leaned against the fire truck, wiping a layer of soot from his forehead, barely catching his breath when the fire chief approached. The older man surveyed him with a mixture of exasperation and amusement. "You want to tell me why I had to send a whole damn convoy to your neighborhood this morning?" Jake exhaled a tired laugh. "Long story." The chief crossed his arms. "I got time." Jake smirked. "OA lady tried to fine me for parking my truck in my own driveway. Blocked me from leaving when the call came in." The chief stared at him for a long moment before muttering a string of curses under his breath. "You need me to handle this? I can make a call, raise some hell." Jake shook his head, amused. "Tempting, but I think she's digging her own grave. She's already pissed off half the neighborhood. I just need to be ready for whatever she tries next." The chief clapped a firm hand on his shoulder. "If she wants a fight, she's going to learn real fast that messing with firefighters is a bad idea." By the time Jake finally made it home that evening, he was dead on his feet, muscles aching, lungs still tight from inhaling smoke. All he wanted was a shower, a meal, and at least 12 uninterrupted hours of sleep. But as soon as he stepped out of his truck, his exhaustion was replaced with disbelief. Standing at the edge of his driveway, arms crossed, was Karen. A smug grin was plastered across her face, as if she had been waiting for this moment all day. Jake ran a hand down his face, exasperated. "You've got to be kidding me." Karen stepped forward with the air of someone who had already won. "I warned you," she said sweetly. "Since you refused to comply with the fine, I had no choice but to escalate the matter." Jake narrowed his eyes. "Escalate?" Karen's grin widened. "Oh, you'll find out soon enough." At that moment, the unmistakable rumble of a heavy-duty vehicle echoed down the street. Jake turned just in time to see a tow truck rolling up, its flashing lights illuminating the growing crowd of neighbors who had once again gathered to witness the drama unfold. Jake's exhaustion evaporated, replaced by sheer disbelief. "No way," he muttered. "You did not just call a tow truck for my—" Karen held up a hand, cutting him off with a satisfied smirk. "It's out of my hands now," she said smugly. "OA regulations state that any unauthorized commercial vehicle in a residential driveway can and will be towed at the homeowner's expense." The tow truck driver climbed out, looking between Karen and Jake with a wary expression. Is this actually a commercial vehicle? 'Cause I really don't want to tow a firefighter's truck, lady." Karen's expression darkened. "It's unauthorized. That's all that matters." Jake could hear the murmurs of disapproval from the neighbors, some already pulling out their phones to record the ridiculous scene. His fists clenched at his sides, trying to decide how to handle this when suddenly, as if on cue, the distant sound of sirens filled the air once more. Karen's smirk faltered. The murmurs grew louder, and then, like a scene straight out of an action movie, a convoy of fire trucks appeared on the horizon, rolling into the neighborhood with deliberate, undeniable authority. Their lights flashed ominously, sirens wailing just enough to make a statement. The fire chief himself stepped out of the lead truck, his expression a perfect mix of irritation and barely contained amusement as he took in the spectacle before him. The tow truck driver visibly paled. "Oh, hell no," he muttered. "I am not getting involved in this." Jake crossed his arms, smirking. "You were saying, Karen?" Karen stormed into her house, slamming the door so hard the windows rattled. Her heart pounded, her breath came in furious bursts, and her perfectly manicured nails dug into her phone as she dialed the HOA board for the second time that day. It went straight to voicemail. She cursed under her breath, paced a tight circle in her living room, then tried again. Voicemail. Again. They were ignoring her. The realization sent a fresh wave of anger surging through her. How dare they? She had upheld the rules of this neighborhood for years, kept the community pristine, ensured that property values remained high, and now, after one ridiculous morning, they were all turning on her. She wasn't about to let this go, not after being publicly humiliated in front of the entire neighborhood by a firefighter who thought he was above the rules. No, this wasn't over. Not by a long shot. She needed a new plan. She snatched her laptop off the coffee table, fingers flying across the keyboard as she drafted a formal complaint to the board. Subject: urgent, ongoing violation and threat to community standards. She laid out the case in excruciating detail. How Jake Miller had blatantly disregarded HOA regulations, how his vehicle was a clear violation, how he had riled up the neighborhood against her authority. She even added a note about the fire chief's inappropriate interference in HOA matters. If the board wouldn't listen to her calls, they'd have to acknowledge a formal complaint. Satisfied, she hit send, then sat back, arms crossed, waiting for a response. Meanwhile, outside, the neighborhood remained abuzz. People gathered in groups, laughing, shaking their heads, recounting every detail of the spectacle they had just witnessed. It wasn't every day that someone tried to tow a firefighter's truck and got shut down by an entire fire department. The videos were already circulating in the community group chat, some even making their way onto social media. Who'd carry in? These firefighters was quickly becoming the neighborhood's biggest drama of the year. Jake, still leaning against his truck, let out a breath and shook his head. Unbelievable, he muttered. The fire chief, still present, clapped him on the back. Get some rest, kid. Something tells me this fight isn't over. Jake nodded, watching as the fire truck slowly rolled away. He knew the chief was right. Karen wasn't the type to admit defeat. She was in there right now, plotting her next move. And indeed, inside her house, Karen sat stiffly at her desk, glaring at her phone. Still no response from the board, her jaw clenched. They were probably discussing this without her, making decisions without her. The thought made her blood boil. She needed to regain control. If the board wouldn't act, she'd take it a step further. She would go to city enforcement. Surely there were broader municipal codes that supported her argument. She opened a new browser tab and began searching local ordinances, convinced she'd find something to justify her position, but as she scrolled, her frustration only grew. Nothing explicitly backed her up. HOA rules didn't override emergency response laws, and she knew the fire department had made that very clear. The realization crept in, slow and insidious. She had miscalculated. Badly. But Karen wasn't one to back down, even in the face of overwhelming odds. If the rules wouldn't work in her favor, then she'd do what she did best, rally support. She would talk to the most loyal members of the HOA, gather signatures, make this a bigger issue than just one firefighter's truck. She refused to be seen as the villain in this. She was the enforcer of order, the protector of this neighborhood. If they thought she would simply disappear into the background after today, they had another thing coming. As the evening settled in, Jake finally trudged inside, exhaustion weighing him down like lead. He barely had the energy to eat before collapsing onto his couch, Sparky immediately hopping up beside him. Just as he began drifting off, his phone buzzed. A text from one of his neighbors. "Dude, have you checked the HOA group page?" Jake groaned, sitting up and opening the app. His eyebrows shot up as he scrolled through the messages. Karen was at it again. She had posted a formal statement, twisting the narrative, claiming that she had been publicly disrespected by city officials and that Jake had incited hostility against the HOA. She was calling for an emergency meeting to reaffirm the importance of community standards. Jake let out a slow, tired laugh. "Oh, Karen," he muttered, shaking his head, "you really don't know when to quit." Karen's fingers tightened around her phone as the call disconnected, leaving behind a dead silence that seemed to echo louder than any argument she had ever won. She stood motionless in her dimly lit living room, her carefully ordered world crumbling around her like a sandcastle in the tide. The HOA board had removed her after years of tireless service, of enforcing rules, of keeping this neighborhood from descending into chaos. They had cast her aside like an outdated piece of furniture. The sheer betrayal of it stung more than she was willing to admit. They were nothing without her. They had no backbone, no discipline. Without her leadership, this place would fall into ruin, and when it did, they would come crawling back. They would regret this. But for now, she needed a new plan. Karen stormed to her desk, flipping open her laptop with a force that rattled her neatly arranged pens. If the board wouldn't back her, she'd take this fight straight to the residents. She opened the HOA's community forum, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she drafted a post dripping with authority. Effective leadership is often misunderstood, but rules exist for a reason. Yesterday, I was unfairly removed from my position simply for upholding the standards that keep our neighborhood pristine. If we allow special exceptions, where does it end? Do we really want food trucks clogging our streets, bright neon signs ruining our aesthetic? A firefighter may have been at the center of this issue, but this is about something bigger: order. Without order, there is chaos. If you support a structured, well-maintained neighborhood, I urge you to attend the next HOA meeting and make your voices heard. The integrity of our community depends on it. She sat back satisfied before hitting post. The words would do their job. Even if some of the weak-minded residents had been swayed by the spectacle, there were still those who valued rules, those who appreciated the way she had kept this place running like a well-oiled machine. And yet, as she refreshed the page, the responses flooded in, and they weren't what she had expected. Can't give it up already. You tried to tow a firefighter's truck. Just admit you were wrong. HD dictatorship is officially over. Best day of my life. Maybe now I can leave my Christmas lights past New Year's without getting fined. Her jaw clenched tighter with every comment, a slow burn of disbelief turning into white-hot anger. How dared they, after everything she had done? She was the only reason this place wasn't overrun with clutter and disorder, the only reason property values had stayed high, and now they were all celebrating her downfall like it was some kind of victory? She was about to type a scathing response when a new post at the top of the forum caught her eye. It had been pinned by Mark, the same board member who had unceremoniously cut her off last night. The title alone made her blood run cold. The wall moving forward, a return to community. She clicked it, her eyes scanning over the message. It was an official statement from the board, declaring a shift in the HOA's priorities, less focus on punitive measures, more on fostering a sense of togetherness. No more excessive fines, no more micromanagement of home aesthetics. A neighborhood that belongs to its residents, not its enforcers. Karen's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't just about removing her. They were undoing everything she had built. All her years of effort erased with a single policy shift. And worse, people were celebrating it. The comment section was filled with neighbors thanking the board, expressing relief, planning a community-wide gathering to mark a fresh start. As if on cue, a sound drifted in through her open window. The unmistakable hum of laughter, the clinking of glasses, the carefree chatter of people who, for the first time in years, weren't looking over their shoulders for a rule violation. Her fingers twitched, ready to slam her laptop shut, but then she saw something that made her stomach twist into a knot. A massive banner stretched across the entrance to the neighborhood park, bold and bright for everyone to see. Neighborhood barbecue, celebrating the end of HOA tyranny, free food, everyone welcome. Karen shot to her feet, her pulse hammering as she yanked open the blinds. Outside, families were gathering, lawn chairs were being set up, a grill was already firing up, people were smiling, greeting each other like actual neighbors instead of law-abiding subjects. And then, standing at the edge of his driveway, casually loading a cooler into his truck, was Jake. He looked up just as she spotted him. His golden retriever Sparky wagged his tail beside him, and then, the final blow, Jake grinned and waved. "Morning, Karen. Hope to see you at the barbecue." Karen slammed the blinds shut with a force that rattled the frame. She spun away, fists clenched at her sides, her heart pounding with a mix of fury and something more unsettling. Defeat. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. She was supposed to be the one in charge, the one dictating how things ran, the one setting the standard. And now she was a joke, a relic of a regime that had crumbled overnight. But Karen wasn't done, not yet. She inhaled sharply, straightened her blazer, and lifted her chin. If the board thought they had seen the last of her, they were sorely mistaken. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. In today's society, Karen's downfall serves as a lesson about leadership, control, and the importance of community. We all know someone like Karen, someone who clings to power, convinced that rules and authority matter more than human connection. But at what point does enforcing structure turn into micromanagement? At what point does order stifle the very sense of belonging that makes a neighborhood or any community thrive? The truth is, communities flourish not through rigid enforcement, but through mutual respect and understanding. People don't want to live under constant scrutiny. They want to feel at home, to connect with others, to contribute freely without fear of arbitrary punishment. This applies beyond HOA drama. It's relevant in workplaces, schools, and even government. When rules become more about power than purpose, they breed resentment rather than unity. So ask yourself, do we focus too much on control instead of cooperation? Where in our daily lives do we see leadership failing because it values authority over people? Have you ever encountered a Karen in your own life? How did you handle it, and what do you think is the best balance between structure and freedom? Share your thoughts in the comments. Let's start a conversation.